Hello everyone, my name's Steve Bell. I'd like to share with you over the next 15 minutes an outline of my research study. What I would like to do over that time is talk to you about the background of the work I'm doing, my research questions, the study of and why it is so significant, what the literature tells us about the work done in this area so far, the potential theoretical framework, my planned methodology, a timeline and some considerations that have been put in place around logistics and resource implications. This study has quite a significant background, and it's focused on what I do understand to be happening around school improvement around the world. If you look at Australia's performance over recent times, it's quite obvious that we now have a widening achievement gap between low and high performing students. And this has been exacerbated and it's getting worse over the last few years. We also have a decreasing number of student achievement levels against other OECD countries. So we're slipping down the league table, for want of a better description, with regards to our performance with other countries that belong to the OECD. There's also an inability shown in the data around closing the gap. Our Indigenous students, some of our most vulnerable students, are falling behind our non-Indigenous students. So that is a cause of significance, especially for where I come from. And if you look at the performance of the region that I belong to in the State Education Department in Queensland, our performance over the last few years mirrors that of Australia. So I guess it's been a little bit disappointing despite the amount of energy and effort we've put into the school improvement process. And I guess counter to this, I have a significant belief that our students are capable of performing at a level that's commensurate with those in other countries, and certainly those from other parts of Australia who are performing better than us. So I guess this background is significant because what we want to do is be able to understand the reasons why our students are falling behind. The research question that I'm looking at essentially is around how a regional leader, an assistant regional director specifically, increases the capability of a school principal to optimise teacher collaboration. And I guess the reason why we're focusing specifically on teacher collaboration is that there's a mountain of literature, both from Australian studies and also worldwide studies, that identifies collaboration as an integral part of school improvement and certainly improvement to student outcomes. The purpose of my study is essentially to create a substantive theory about how a regional leader assists a school leader to enhance teacher collaboration in their setting. And that's where I'm going to start. But as I'll explain a little bit later on, because it's a grounded theory approach, that may evolve, but that's essentially the starting point for my work. I did touch on before the significance of this, but if you look at the more recent research, the role of regional leaders have changed significantly over the past few years. When I went to school in the 70s, the regional office role was potentially bureaucratic. So what they did was did a lot of work around HR, a lot of work around budgets, a lot of work around organising resources for schools and recruitment and selection. And we now know that all that was all very best intentioned. It didn't really impact on the achievement of students in classrooms and the capacity of teachers to do their job. So once the research illuminated the fact that the bureaucracy wasn't a great contributor to school improvement, the next iteration of school improvement came around site-based management, where what they tried to do was identify schools that were high performing and then replicate particular processes and programs that they had in place to other sites. And they soon found that because contexts are so different and the people who are leading and the people who are being led are so different, that there is no guarantee that even with fidelity and rigour of implementation of those processes that worked in some settings, there was no guarantee that they'd work in others. So the research then soon showed us that the one-size-fits-all strategy around school improvement and relationships between regions and schools also didn't hit the mark. So more recently, since the late 90s and certainly into the first part of this century, we've focused more on autonomy and how that contributes to school improvement. So schools being able to make decisions about what they do and how they do it in their own context-specific settings, And there's been a mountain of research around that over the last decade or so. But it's still, I guess, to this point in time, hasn't been proven that autonomy actually contributes directly to school improvement. So despite this, there is copious research on teacher collaboration, but it specifically focuses on what the principal does, what happens in the school, what the role of the teacher is. It does not in any way describe in a deep and dense way, in a meticulous way, what the role of the regional leader is in that process. So there's very little research on that. And if you look at the work of McLaughlin and Talbot, Berrendy, Motley and Kirby, McIver and Farley, they have begun to be able to substantiate that regional officers are important and they contribute to school improvement, but they're not necessarily able at this point in time to describe how that actually takes place. So it's been interesting looking at the literature. And as I previously mentioned, effective principles and teacher capability development is grounded in collaboration. All of the work of Hattie, or not all the work of Hattie, but significant parts of Hattie's research and significant parts of research from people like Fullan and Hargraves, Leithwood, etc., they identify collaboration as a key component of building the capacity of teachers to do their work. So collaboration is certainly desirable, but it's just the role and the nuance and the interface between what the regional leader does and the school leader that's still unknown, or we're still unable to describe. We can talk about what it looks like, but we can't talk about how it's done. Looking back, it's also obvious that delegation of authority doesn't work. I've already touched on that. Anderson came out with a very important finding that context is important, and I guess that fits very well with my constructive view of the world. I'll talk a little bit later. And as mentioned by those researchers, they can certainly describe what it looks like, but they can't actually talk about how it's done. The most recent research, however, is being carried out by a lady called Meredith Honig, and it's predominantly been done in the States. And she's actually started to look very specifically about the role of regions and districts and how they can contribute to school improvement. And her early work has defined four significant tools, or four significant perspectives that contribute to school improvement. She talks about the notion of joint work and the importance of regional leaders and school leaders co-constructing the scope of work in schools, looking at and investigating what the data in the school setting tells them, what the research says about the particular initiatives that they wish to undertake, talks about the co-design of targets and specific behaviours that they want to see. Also talks about how you build implementation plans together and the importance of having interrogation and integrity measures so that you can measure progress. So she's done some significant work around the joint work, again, specifically around describing it, not so much about how it's done. She's also alluded to the fact that the development and use of tools in schools that are provided by regions and again, co-designed and co-constructed together can actually change people's behaviour and facilitate collaboration. The importance of modelling and showing people different ways of doing specific things and how adults can learn through that quite effectively, and the role of the region in brokering and buffering resources, brokering in terms of providing additional resources and buffering in terms of making sure that there's less distractions and specific bureaucratic and things that schools need to do don't necessarily detract from the important work, would be an example of buffering. So there is a lot of research around school improvement, but not much around the role of regional leaders and their interface with school leaders and how that contributes to improved collaboration. There is very little on that, and Honig has just begun that research, and many of her more recent papers talks about the need for more work in this area. The theoretical framework which I'll be using is based on the epistemology of constructivism, which I guess suits my view of the world, and that people construct meaning through their experiences and that there are multiple versions and interpretations of what they think needs to happen. So what I'm anticipating doing is looking at my research question through two lenses. The first one, a leadership lens, and the second one, a learning lens. The leadership lens will be based on the type of leadership that we see in schools. So I've gone back and had a look at the early work of Lewin, who defines 3 types of leaders: the autocratic, the laissez-faire, and the democratic. Just to focus on a very small part of his leadership theory around democratic leadership, he identifies a number of concepts which are of critical importance. He talks about communal accountability and responsibility, collective determination in terms of making decisions, the importance of empowerment and people having an opportunity to have significant input and control over their destiny, and the whole notion of inclusiveness and the fact that there needs to be high levels of equity in things in schools. So those concepts will give me a lens in which I can look at the relationship between the leaders of schools and the regional leaders, and to explore whether a particular type of leadership contributes more effectively to the desired collaboration that we want to see in schools, because we know from the literature that it is very significant in terms of driving schooling improvement. Just very quickly, the second theoretical framework will revolve around the notion of socio-cultural learning. And again, that's based on Vygotsky's work. Honig's 4 types of assistance relationships that we mentioned before: the modelling, the co-construction and joint work, the brokering and buffering, etc., they are based on socio-cultural learning theory, and she talks about that in her research. From his perspective, engagement with others and the use of tools is very significant in terms of the learning process, and he talks at length about the importance of collaboration and the zone of proximal development. In other words, identifying a point of need and making sure that you provide learners with the relevant learning opportunities that are specifically targeted to a person's point of need. We know that if you cannot effectively identify a person's point of need, it's very, very difficult to ensure that you give them what they need. So that will be the second lens in which we look at the collaboration through. So they're the 2 theoretical frames. The methodology is a little bit messy. I'm going to do a grounded theory study which matches very precisely with what it is I'm trying to do, to build a substantive theory around the relationship of how a regional leader and a school leader can work together to optimise collaboration. So it will be a grounded theory approach, which essentially is a recursive loop where you collect data, you analyse it, you interpret it, you compare, and you go back, and you keep going through that loop. The collection process will essentially be based on interviews and observations. Interviews will be semi-structured in nature, so you don't actually predetermine responses and you don't limit people's opportunity to give quality feedback. There'll be individual interviews and also focus group interviews, observations as a participant in the learning process, but also observations of others. And obviously there'll be other various artefacts and things that I won't go into detail here, but the 2 significant data collection processes will be interviews and observations. The data analysis process is a process of getting all the information from those data collection techniques, coding the information to see whether it fits together, categorising it, and then writing myself emails or memoing as I progress through the process to illuminate what I understand this data to be telling me, and being able to go back and check and recheck and validate whether this is a true and accurate interpretation of what's happening, and go through the process of checking and rechecking. So the data analysis is sort of based on that capacity to write a very rich and dense and meticulous description of what's going on. It's anticipated that saturation occurs when you cannot illuminate any more theoretical understandings from the information that you are collecting, and you're seeing a repetition of the themes and new understandings that you've come to. And it's anticipated that happens after about 40 to 50 hours of interview and interviews and observations in the field. The participant selection will be interesting. I anticipate going in with 4 or 5 schools and working with 4 or 5 principals and 4 or 5 different regional leaders. However, with grounded theory, it's not always, you're not always able to prescribe very specifically how many people you will need. It really depends on the quality of the information that I receive from those people. So I guess that's a little bit up in the air, but I'm hoping to get that as right as I can initially, but I'll also have to have the capacity to go back and change my sample as and if needed, and I'll work that into the process. The timeline, I guess I've still got one more subject to go. We'll have to do some stat stuff, but I'm hopeful of having confirmation in the first part of next year, and then go through the process of participant and departmental permissions. I've already begun that conversation with the key people in the department with which I work, and I've got some people who are lined up there to help me, which is really important, and that should go well, hopefully. I've also had some people who've indicated a willingness to work with me, but if they fit the parameters, I guess that can happen as well. All things going to plan, data collection finalised by April of 2018, and then into the hard grind around the report writing, and hopefully that's completed by December 2018. Logistics and resource considerations, I guess it's impossible to say precisely what they will be, but given the fact that I work for a department which is a very large bureaucracy, there's always the potential possibility of principal changes and teacher transfers. The notion that I talked very briefly about before about picking inappropriate participants, finding the time to do this and asking people for the time that they need to contribute to make it happen. And there is a little bit of unpredictability in terms of workloads of people who work in schools and in regional offices, depending on what's happening. So hopefully all of those things can be overcome. I guess I anticipate staying in very close contact with my supervisor, who will help me work through those, I guess, as needed. Can I just finish up by saying I very much have enjoyed this subject. I found this quite difficult in 15 minutes to give you a snapshot of what it is I'm trying to do, but hopefully I've been able to do that. Thanks for the opportunity for all of the learning over the next little while, and I look forward to the next part of this professional learning.